Thank you so much, Angie. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks for this opportunity to come and share my story and hopefully help people here be able to understand how to make pivots. So I'm going to share some slides and to just be able to help kind of be able to share a bit more of how I've been able to leverage authentic relationships to make the career pivots. So does that look okay? All right, so thank you again for this opportunity. As I thought about my career path, I often like to think of words that might encompass how I've, navigated these different parts of my career journey. And I would say that for me, the three words that come to mind are grit, action, and relationships. So I'm a scientist in the life science industry and have always been more in this like tech and analytical area of career. And I don't know about you guys here in the tech industry, but a lot of times, we often say to ourselves that as long as we do good work, it will speak for itself and we should be able to, get acknowledged and find those new opportunities. But what I've really found is over the course of my career that yes, grit is important. Yes, taking action is important, but also relationships. And that takes time to form. And so today, what I hope to be able to share with you through my stories of advancing through opportunities are three key takeaways. One is to expect the unexpected. Number two is recognizing that business is really about people. And the last one is curiosity is what propels us forward. And so my story actually begins long before my own origin. And that is with my parents, who are shown here. My parents grew up in southern China in the villages called Huang, and they, had a very, very difficult life there because of being in this very impoverished environment. But they knew that there were opportunities in America if they were willing to leave the comfort of the familiarity of their home and their community there. And so my parents ended up coming to the US in the 80s and settling in Boston, where my brother and I were born, and then moving us to Los Angeles, where I ultimately grew up. And life in America for them was definitely very, very difficult for all of us. We often were in a survival mindset and thought a lot about how to make the most of what we had. And so for me, I grew up seeing my parents with that grit every single day as they went to work. My dad as a cook and my mom as a seamstress, coming home to take care of my brother and me, despite having that tiredness in their eyes. And that was a value that I took on early as I saw them get through each day, with that determination that this was going to be a better life for us. And that allowed me to have my own dreams. And for the longest time, I had a dream of becoming a scientist. And specifically a scientist that would study the cosmos and the universe and wanting to understand how everything began and how we're evolving over time. And with this fascination, I had a goal of going to a very, very technical school, the California Institute of Technology. And that's because they had this NASA center, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where a lot of the rovers that have gone into Mars were created and sent off and launched. And so I had my eyes set on going to Caltech, but there was just one problem. Students like myself, who were the first in our families to go to college or who grew up in low-income communities, didn't make it to schools like Caltech. And growing up, I was told often, are you sure you want to go for a school like that? Do you have what it takes? Do you know how hard it is to not only get there, but to get through it? But through a lot of amazing mentors and teachers at the time, before I even understood what mentors were, I was able to get that encouragement to really be able to push myself beyond those limiting beliefs that I wasn't good enough and that I can, if I tried, I at least had a chance of getting to this dream I had of becoming a scientist. And so with their encouragement and with their support through writing letters of recommendation for me, I ended up going to Caltech. And in my first summer, I ended up landing an internship at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which again was what I thought was going to be my dream. And that experience was truly transformational, not because I was able to attain my dream, but because it actually made me realize that I didn't actually want to study astronomy. And up until that point, that was everything. All my personal statements was about becoming an astronomer, working for NASA. And I came back into my sophomore year, all of a sudden, incredibly confused, very scared. You know, I had no plan B. I didn't even know exactly how to look for a new opportunity. All I knew was everything that I had planned for was now out the door. And so I remember being quite sad and depressed for a few months as I was trying to figure out how do I find my way, especially when everyone else looked like they were, you know, on a path already and all set. And after a few weeks of moping around, I finally mustered up the strength to just say, hey, you know what? I've gone through a lot of difficult things. I've seen my parents go through a lot of difficult things. Let me tap into that resourcefulness and grit that I remember that they demonstrated each and every day. And so I got on the websites of different departments at Caltech and landed on the Geology and Planetary Science department, where I saw a video of a talk that was given by a professor of geobiology, Professor Diane Newman. And she talked about the wonders of microorganisms, bacteria that live on the Earth, and how they've helped evolve the Earth's history and allowed for oxygen to come into the atmosphere, which ultimately allowed organisms like humans to evolve. And her talk really reframed how I thought about bacteria. You know, oftentimes we're always thinking about bacteria as disease-causing organisms. And in her talk, it really made me think about the beneficial roles that bacteria played. And it was just such a fascinating talk that I decided, you know what, I need to learn more. And so I reached out to her and wrote her an email asking if I could meet with her to see if there might be an opportunity to work in her lab. But I had no idea if she was actually going to answer my email. You know, I was just a sophomore. But luckily she did, and she invited me to come and speak with her. And in a short time, I ended up working in her lab for 5 weeks. And that was a transformational experience itself as well, because it not only gave me a sense of confidence that I can make this pivot in science, but that I was able to tap into that grit and resourcefulness whenever I needed to make these changes. And so while my time with her was short, and that was due to her actually leaving for another university after those 5 weeks, it was enough for me to get super excited about the idea of becoming a scientist studying microorganisms. But when she had ended that time with me in her lab, I again was caught in this moment of self-doubt of, okay, what do I do next? Because now this is done and I don't have another path to move forward to. And so once again, I tapped into the resourcefulness and that I learned from my parents. And I went and attended an event where we were having students meet with faculty members from different departments. Mind you, I was a very introverted person, so this was a really tough thing to just even get myself out there. But I'm so glad I did, because in that tea party, which was the event that I attended, I actually ended up meeting a professor, Sarkis Mezvinian, who really pivoted me into this whole world of studying the beneficial microbes that live in the body, in our gut. And yet this story was really funny because I was literally 5 minutes away from missing out on meeting him, because I attended that tea party and met with some of the professors, but ultimately decided that none of them really clicked with me. And I was about to leave when I thought, okay, I should go and thank the host. That's the polite thing to do. And as I went to thank the host, Sarkis had just arrived and was speaking with her. And so she introduced us. And in chatting with him, that was how I ended up realizing, like, this was an amazing area of science that I could see myself going into. And so I remember going home incredibly excited and emailed him and said, "Dear Professor Mazmanian, may I have the opportunity to work in your lab? I see that you had a summer project." And he wrote back to me and he said, "You know, it was great to meet you, but unfortunately, I've given this project to another student." And I remember being so sad that I might have already missed out on an opportunity before, you know, even joining his group. But again, tapping into that grit and resourcefulness, I thought, you know, what if I asked him for just a short stint in his lab, just like I had in Diane's group? And so I ended up proposing that to work in his lab for just a few months, and he accepted. But during that time, he saw how excited and invested I was. And so he was able to encouraged me to write a new proposal for the summer, which ultimately got funded. And so I ended up working in his lab, not only for that summer, but for the remaining 2 years of my time at Caltech, which again pivoted me to this whole new world of studying bacteria and the life sciences and health. And that was really due to that moment of pushing myself out of my comfort zone to attend that tea party and ultimately making that decision to talk to him. Now, Sarkis really not only gave me that training, but also served as my first mentor as I understood that concept of mentor. He encouraged me to think of opportunities that I wouldn't have thought of for myself. And that included applying for a fellowship called the Fulbright. And I never thought I would be someone who would be able to get a fellowship like the Fulbright, which allows people to go from the US to study abroad. But I ended up getting one, and I ended up taking that opportunity to go all the way to Germany, where I was able to do research at a really awesome Max Planck Institute. And this is really important because this is how mentors really operate, in which they see the potential in you when you may not see it in yourself. And that is why also nowadays I serve a lot as mentors for younger people, because I think that sense of encouragement is really what allows people to take that leap of faith and make pivots, whether in career or even in their studies. And so going to Germany was an incredible experience, teaching me how to think about science from this broader international level. And it gave me a chance to come back to the States, where I pursued a PhD at Stanford. And that was a really wonderful time as well, not only for me to grow as a scientist, but to actually tap into a lot of my personal interest in wanting to be in community with other people to create opportunities for others. For me, it was a lot of focus on women in STEM, as well as those who are the first in their families to attend college, first generation low-income students like myself. But that time at Stanford really got me a chance to also get exposed to the world of industry. And that was because being in the Bay Area, we were amongst a lot of really great companies. Now, I had a thought of really pursuing a career in academia for the longest time, as many of us do when we go to grad school. But towards the end of my PhD, I had someone in my lab who really got me to start thinking about whether I might want to consider opportunities in industry. But that was actually a very hard pivot for a lot of us, moving from academia into a company. But with a lot of, again, grit, I sought out opportunities to do an internship as a PhD student, which is kind of unusual. But at companies here in the Bay Area, like Genentech, which I like to think of as the biotech of the Google of biotech, they had these opportunities for graduate students. And so I ended up getting that opportunity to really test out the waters. Do I actually want to go into industry? My philosophy is that I should always run towards something as opposed to running away from something. And so doing that internship, just like the internship at JPL, was incredibly informative because it made me realize that, yes, I do see myself in industry, but more importantly, I wanted to go into industry to do what we call a postdoctoral fellowship, which is additional training after the PhD to move into a new field. Because in that internship, I realized that while I had a lot of training and knowledge on bacteria and microorganisms living in the body, what I really wanted to understand was, how does the immune system actually respond to these bacteria? And yet I didn't have that training in immunology. And so during that internship, I met a postdoc at Genentech who saw my PhD thesis talk and thought, you would be a great fit with my manager. He's actually leaving Genentech to start a lab at a company called Amgen. And Amgen is known for also developing a lot of treatments for cancer, immuno-oncology therapies. And because of this postdoc, having known what I was interested in and seeing how I had already made some pivots in my own science, he was able to vouch for me and made that referral that ultimately got me that opportunity to join this lab at Amgen, where again, I had no experience as an immunologist, which was the reason why I was going. But because of that important relationship that I cultivated that summer, I was able to have someone really be able to set that referral for me that ultimately gave me a chance to go and interview. And of course, during the interview, it was up to me to convince the group that I was ready to take on this new opportunity. Now that opportunity at Amgen really did open up a lot for me, because coming in without that immunology experience and then leaving with that toolkit and understanding how we can leverage the immune system to fight off different diseases, that ultimately got me to explore opportunities at different companies. And the next pivot I ended up going to was at a small startup called Caribou Biosciences. This was the first company that spun out of UC Berkeley, and Jennifer Doudna, who co-invented the CRISPR gene editing technology. She started this company to really be able to pursue the development of that genetic technology and to develop what we call live cell therapies, where we edit the cells and use them as treatments for cancer. So how did I even get connected to Caribou when I was at a company like Amgen? Well, during that time, I continued to get to know different people in the industry. And I went to an event where I met Rachel Horowitz, who's the CEO. I remember going to this event and feeling so insecure because there were all these people who seemed much more experienced than I was. I didn't know a single person. And I was feeling really out of place when all of a sudden, a woman named Lynn, who is here in the middle, showed up. And she said, "Hey, is this your first time?" And I said, "Yes, coming to this event." And she said, "Let me introduce you to all the speakers and the organizers of this great organization." And because of Lynn's kindness and generosity and opening up her network to me, I started to feel immediately at ease. And that night, I couldn't have imagined that I would end up sitting with Rachel for dinner and sharing a little bit about my own experience in not only the immunology side, but the microbiology side. And before I knew it, she invited me to have lunch with her. And during that lunch, she also told me about what they were working on, where they were bringing in their platform to develop microbial therapeutics. And I thought, this would be such a cool place for me to bridge what I did at Stanford, as well as what I did at Amgen. And so because of that experience, I landed that job at Caribou Biosciences, where they actually didn't even know they needed someone like me. But after speaking with me, they decided, this would be a good opportunity to bring in someone with my skills to help them develop proof of concept studies. And so that the life lesson I learned through that experience was to be proactive. As we push ourselves out of our comfort zone to go to these events, to go and meet these people, to introduce ourselves, that's how we can get ahead. And often we think about this as being lucky. I was lucky to meet Rachel, lucky that she maybe created a job for me. But I really believe that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And so from Caribou, towards the end of my time there, I had an itch to see what was it like to move into clinical trials. We develop treatments, but then we also want to make sure treatments work in people. And that's where clinical trials come into play. And that was where I learned about a company called Alector, which was a company focused on developing treatments for brain disorders and neurodegenerative diseases like dementia. Now, I have no background in neurodegeneration, no background in neuroscience, but I was able to convince the hiring manager that I had made these big pivots already in my career, and that I had this background in immunology that which will ultimately give me the chance to understand how we can leverage the immune system in the brain to develop new treatments. And because of that, and being able to share that story of how I pivoted from these different areas of science, they were willing to take me on. And so that's where I've been focused on working on clinical trials to assess new treatments for neurodegeneration. Now, the life lesson from this experience was to maintain a growth mindset, because oftentimes we might tell ourselves we're only going to be good in doing this particular area and staying in that realm of comfort. But having that growth mindset allowed me to move forward into these new roles. So I think at this point, I wanted to transition and just say that a lot of times we don't know exactly where to actually go as we want to develop our networks. And that's where I want to say that in addition to work, make sure to keep that time in getting connected with organizations that you truly believe in the mission of, like Girl Geek. I think this is an amazing organization. And for me, I've been a part of a lot of women-focused associations that are supporting women in STEM and in science, as well as young women, all the way from like middle school up until like later on. And the mentorship piece has been a key part of how I've continued to not only grow in getting mentorship, but also growing in mentoring others, because I do believe mentorship is both ways.